so we are going to go ahead and get started. Feel free to continue to use the chat area to introduce yourself as we go along. So welcome to today's CSL in session. My name is Christine Krieger, and I am the Professional Development Consultant for the Colorado State Library. Before we get started, I want to briefly introduce you to CSL in session in case you have not had an opportunity to attend before. So you're probably used to webinars where you log in and you're able to just kind of kick back and people talk at you for an hour. But we try to shake things up a little bit here with CSL in session, and there's going to be multiple opportunities for you to share your thoughts, your questions, your ideas as we go through today's session. We find that people learn as much from each other as you will from the presenter. So we're hoping that you will participate as we go through. The primary way that you are going to participate is using the chat area, and many of you have used it to introduce yourself. If you need to get a hold of me for any reason, in the far upper left corner, and you should see where it says hosts and Colorado State. That is me. If you hover over that, you should be able to send me a private message in case you're having any tech issues, and I can help you with that. We are also recording today's session in case you do have tech issues, you have to duck out early, or you have colleagues who weren't able to attend today. And the archive should be available by tomorrow morning on the Libraries Learn website. And we do also have closed captions available for today, so you should be able to turn the closed captions on. I am actually not seeing them show up, but they probably will show up here shortly. So look for the closed captions. Then you'll be able to move the closed captions around the screen or make them bigger or smaller as needed. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague here at the State Library, Christy Moran. And Christy, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to see everyone here from all different places. My name is Christy Moran, and my pronouns are she and ella. I am the Adult Library Services Senior Consultant at the Colorado State Library. What that means in short is I'm a librarian, just like Christina is, for library folks and librarians in the state of Colorado. Thank you for coming to this webinar. This is a presentation I do pretty often. Bienvenidos, creating welcome for Hispanohablantes and Latines at your library. So as a part of my job, one of the things I do is kind of support libraries in providing service and extending service, expanding service to folks from the Latino community who your libraries serve, whether or not they're Spanish speakers. And I'm going to give you a pro tip about literally everything I'm going to present today. Creating a welcome for folks who speak Spanish in your libraries also creates welcome for everyone. You're welcome. So I am going to cover a few things today. My outcomes for you, my hopes for you, are that anyone who attends this can gain some insight into the Hispanohablante and Latine populations that you serve by discovering barriers to that feeling welcome at libraries. And that is coming from the perspective of some, it's really important, so some Hispanohablantes, and to hopefully establish some best practices for welcoming visitors, again, regardless of linguistic barriers. The QR code on this slide is for LibNet. This may not be relevant if you are outside of Colorado, but if you are here from Colorado, this is the listserv where libraries from our state share information and ask questions of one another, and where you may also find opportunities like this webinar and other communities of practice related to serving Latine folks. So I'm going to get right into it. And the first thing we're going to do is a chat activity. So you see this on your screen. Many of you are familiar with this. How do you say this? What is the name of this? And specifically, yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Some of you are giving some of the answers that I have. Radio Ambulante, which is a Spanish language podcast that also has really rich and robust web content. You can find them on Instagram. Put this out, this photo, and asked us, ¿Cómo se dice? How do you say this? And I loved the responses so much that I shared it on my LinkedIn. And I got a bunch of other responses as well. So anybody else? I will tell you right now that palomitas de maíz is how I would say it. Oh, actually, I would say rositas de maíz. Rositas de maíz is how Cubans say this popcorn. I have totally not heard of some of these before. So I hear palomitas quite a bit. Palomitas, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, like doves, little doves. Maíz birra is the way that some Colombians say it. Also, crispetas might be a Colombian way of saying that. Pocholo is Argentinian. Canchita is Peru. And these are just people on my LinkedIn. Palomitas, Costa Ricans, but also some of you said palomitas. Where else might you hear palomitas? I mean, unless I've got 3 folks who like straight up are from Costa Rica, which would be awesome. But in Mexico also, yeah, Mexicans, I hear Chile also, awesome. So if I could take anything, if I could have you take away anything from this presentation or from any presentation that I do on any topics related to Latina and Hispanohablante folks, it's that if we can't all come up with the exact same word for popcorn, that should tell you we're all different. All of us have different words for a bunch of different things. The thing that everybody knows as a chancla is something I would call a chancleta. If we can't all come up with the same word for this thing, they're definitely different concepts, different ideas, different traditions, different cultures that are represented within the communities of folks that we would call, quote, Latino or, quote, Hispanic. So if I could give you anything, it would be we all have different words for popcorn. So before we get really started on the content that I want to present, this ends up being a thing I end up talking about a lot. Terminology. So I suspect some of us on this call, some of the folks attending this live, share part of an identity that could be represented on this slide. So words that you hear, terms that you see, to talk about us, to talk about folks who fall within this community are Hispanic. You see or hear Latino or Latina. You see or hear the term Latinx or Latine. And you most often will see this or read this, but you won't hear somebody say it, which is Latine with the @ symbol at the end of that. You'll hear people say we're Spanish. You might hear Spanish speaking or Hispanohablante. Now, I have used some of these terms with you so far. So Hispanohablante is Spanish speaking. It's just the translation, the Spanish translation for that. And you've also heard me, or you've even seen me say Latine. What you should know is that according to Pew Research and according to me and my own personal experience, most of us who are within these umbrella terms, right? Because that's really what they are, these umbrella terms of Latinidad, don't really care what term you use, as long as you are being respectful, thoughtful, and you're saying what you mean. So one thing that's really important is that Latine folks who are Hispanic, folks whose parents were Hispanic or grandparents or whatever, they may not be Spanish speakers. We may not be Spanish speakers. Likewise, a lot of people who are Spanish speakers are not from one of the identities, I guess is the best way to put it, one of the shared identities or individual country or national origin identities that speak Spanish. These are excellent umbrella terms, and that's what they are. But as evidenced by all of us having our own words for popcorn, we're not all the same. Our traditions are different. Some things are the same because some things are the same for a lot of folks. So I will move on very quickly, but I do want to say something about the term that I will choose to use. That third bullet, Latinx, Latine, and then the Latine with at the end, is a gender inclusive attempt, rather, at making Spanish, which is a very gendered language, into a gender inclusive terminology. I use Latine because it is the one that most closely resembles Spanish. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to say Latinx in Spanish in a way that sounded authentic to me anyway. Do your best and use whatever it is that you want. Just try to be respectful. And I'm moving on. So now, Christine mentioned that in CSL and sessions, we like to be really engaged. And that's something that we do, I think, in all of our workshops and presentations at Colorado State Library. And so I'm going to challenge you now to start with that. I'm going to give you a lot of slides and a lot of tips, and we're going to talk about a bit. And then at the end, 10 minutes to the end, really, we're going to come up with a discussion. And we're going to do that through a word cloud. But the things that we're going to capture are the important concepts that you've either learned or thought of as something that you should flag for either future practice or future investigation from some of the things that I'm going to show you. So in simple terms, try as I'm going through to be really intentional about what you hear and what you can capture as tags, 5 important ideas. Okay. Could be a word. If we were doing this in person, I'd have sticky notes in front of you and I'd tell you put one word or idea on each sticky note. And then we'll take a look at them later. So start writing down what it is you think are things that you would want to talk about or think about or follow up on later. Or maybe are just useful. And does anyone have any questions about that? It's kind of tough when it's a chat, but. All right, I'm going to keep going. Just pay attention. So a few months ago, maybe even a year ago already, I put out an anonymous survey to library staff and through a library association, Reforma, that serves or of folks who serve in libraries, folks who are Spanish speakers and Latinos through library service. And many of the people who I work with in Colorado and outside are not Latino or Latine, and want to do our best or your best job in serving our communities. And then on the other side, there are folks that are Latine and sometimes can get very frustrated with the attempts to serve or the lack of ability to serve or the lack of service to these same communities. So I put out an anonymous survey and I said, for those of you who are bilingual, bicultural, multicultural, multilingual within the Latine community that work at libraries, what is one thing that you want your non-Latine coworkers to know? So I asked straight up, I will be presenting on this. I will tell your colleagues what it is that you think will be helpful in the service of our communities. So what you are going to see are pro tips, best practices, or ideas derived from some very real quotes, anonymous, from people, maybe some of your colleagues, some of your coworkers, but people who work in libraries, who are Spanish speakers, and who are from the Latine community. Some of them are going to be very helpful, and some of them you're going to see are a little bit frustrated. Some of them have ideas, and some of them just want you to know some things. So I share this on their behalf with the hope that we're all here to learn how to create welcome in our libraries. So on to it. So the first thing, start with a smile, end with a smile, laugh along the way. I was not surprised, I think, after over a decade working in libraries to read and to discover that the number one thing, the thing that came up the most in all of the responses I received, and I received over 100, were smile. Please smile. Why don't you smile? Smile and acknowledge a customer. And I don't know, is anyone surprised? Like seriously, all of us here, all of us who are here, 31 people, we all work in libraries. Does it surprise you that the number one thing that people recommended was smile? I see some people talking. That's a surprise? Oh my God, it didn't surprise me. And I agree, Kate, it's upsetting. So one of the things that came up a lot was, I don't know, providing a welcome that is visible, that is immediate, that welcomes everyone. Smile. I think it's a basic customer service thing. And I think often we're at the desk or we are at work, right? We are at work. And we forget that the people who are coming in need to be seen. And when it comes to folks in particular who are not used to our places, are not accustomed to libraries, or certainly not accustomed to libraries how we have them in this country, they're already walking in feeling a sense of intimidation and a sense of like there's a challenge, right? There is this barrier, and they're already doing this amazing thing. They're already taking this huge step. And then when they come in, no one even sees them. And I think that that is really scary and really awful. And I think that to create welcome really for anybody is to start with that smile, even if it's just, and I know that this could be really challenging for a lot of folks, and that's okay. We don't have to be all super personable folks, but to start with a smile, to look at somebody and acknowledge their presence is really important. I won't read every single one of the quotes in this slide or all the others. But I do think it's important that we acknowledge that this came up a lot, and these are the actual words of folks who responded to this survey. Many immigrants have a lot of distrust for people in the United States because they have been treated unfairly in the past, or simply because they don't speak English. So a smile goes a long way, and word of mouth spreads quickly. I think we can all acknowledge that that is a very real fear that folks have, and that a smile can communicate so very much. Because even if you don't speak the language that the person who is walking in the door speaks, you're telling them, hi, it's okay to be here. I want you to be here. Something that comes up a lot and people ask me a lot of questions about is whether or not they should say anything because they don't speak Spanish. And my feeling, and this respondent's feeling was, actually, you don't need to say anything at all in English or in Spanish. You could just smile, give a wave, and leave it there. I think, and one of the respondents also think that knowing how to say hello in another language could be very useful, especially if someone starts a conversation with you and you know that that person is speaking in Spanish. It could be very welcoming, and it could just let people know I care enough to learn how to do this very basic thing. Hola, bienvenidos, ¿cómo estás? Could go a really long way. Also saying things like, hola, mi español es muy mal, little things like that. O un poquito, bien poquito could be very helpful. So try English first. Speak simply, not loudly. I just want to put this out there. I think we've all seen like the memes, and we've all watched I remember like in 80s sitcoms where someone doesn't speak English and then the person who does speak English raises their voice as though that's going to help. And I think we all acknowledge how like silly and ridiculous that is. And yet it happens. It happens all the time. So Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Lily. So, real talk, try English first. If you run into a barrier, it's very clear that it becomes a language barrier. Um, then you can say or try something in Spanish. I think the most important thing, and this came up a few times, so you'll see some of the quotes here, is don't freak out. Um, a lot of you guys are from the Carolinas. Well, I mentioned Carolyn Smith from South Carolina State Library, and we do a presentation. We both have programs at our own states for teaching and practicing Spanish for library staff. And we presented at PLA this year, and I got some feedback, and people had reached out. And someone from Tacoma, Perdita, shout out to Perdita if you're hearing this, said to me that one of the most important things that she heard from us, one of the real life-changing things that she heard from us, was that we gave her permission to speak Spanish poorly. Because before, she would freak out, even though she knew a little bit of Spanish, and she'd feel like she couldn't help, and she'd like freeze, and she'd get someone else. And that's not a response that you, as a person who works at a library, wants to have. And it's certainly not one that you want to, like a message you want to convey to the person coming in. Because like that third quote says, what that conveys is that there's a problem, and that person who feels it is the person who walked in the door. Non-English speakers are not a problem to be solved. They are active users of the library who deserve to be addressed as a human being and not glossed over and not ignored until you can find someone that speaks the language they prefer to communicate in. As I mentioned, some of these quotes would be really positive and really helpful, and some would convey frustration. I don't know about you, but that final one, that third one, conveys frustration. And I will say something, as a person who was the only person who spoke Spanish at my library, I also felt that way. Sometimes my colleagues just needed to not freak out, try a little bit, speak in English, speak slowly if you need to, do some broken Spanish. And like that first quote says, do your best effort to communicate using Google Translate if you need to, use your hands, use your face, speak slowly, point at things. When you're trying, what you're communicating to the person who walks in the door is I matter. I belong here. They want me here so bad that they're willing to kind of make themselves look a little silly. They're giving themselves to the permission to speak Spanish poorly just to make me feel like I belong here. And that could be really powerful. So try English first. Don't make assumptions about people speaking English or Spanish. And then if you need to speak Spanish, don't freak out. Try slowly. If you have to, use Google Translate. And then help. This is one that I think some of our libraries have, but not all of our libraries have. Your ability to do something about this is going to differ depending on where you sit in your library's, roles. But one of the things that could be really helpful is to have appropriate multilingual signage. One of the things that we do when we go to places, and it's anywhere, you go to a grocery store, any of us here, we go to a car repair shop, we go to a library, we go to a school. The first thing we do is we look for the signage, we look for the signs, we look for directional things, we look for things to point out the key areas that we should be navigating to or navigate away from. Having multilingual signage or language agnostic signage could be really helpful to orient folks in your building. Besides being helpful to navigate a space, it also is a signal and a sign of welcome. It shows that the institution itself acknowledges that the folks who this institution serves speak and represent more than just one language, more than just English. Doesn't mean that everybody here speaks Spanish. Doesn't mean that everything here is in Spanish. Doesn't mean suddenly we're all going to be celebrating Dia de los Muertos. What it means is when you walk in this door, people expected that you were going to walk in this door. I thought it was very salient, that first bullet on here. Our Spanish-speaking population is 20%. So the library where this person works at. It would be really helpful for folks to be able to navigate the library when it's friendly to their language. And I would add on their own. So our signage helps folks be empowered to do their own thing and move at their own pace and go to where they need to be. Something that comes up quite a bit, certainly something that I encourage, is having translation done, not by Google Translate, not by AI, even though AI is getting better, but having translation done that is culturally relevant to the community where you serve. If you had put pocholo on a sign in a place where where no one was Argentinian, right? And what you were trying to communicate was the popcorn machine is here, nobody would understand you, whether they spoke English or Spanish, because that is a word that is, colloquial to Argentina, perhaps. But by putting a word that, like palomitas or rositas de maíz, people from, Mexico, people from Cuba, people from other places that use those terms would be, would understand. I'm being pretty simplistic and pretty specific to the earlier example, but there's this idea that there's one word and one concept, or one word or one label to share a concept. And in Spanish, that's just not true. So please bear in mind, if you could do translations of signs or translations of really important documents, make sure that they're relevant to the place where you are and the people who live in your community. Caitlin writes, words plus images also help a lot. Yeah. You mentioned me saying, you heard me saying language agnostic. If you could have language agnostic signage, I swear that's even better. Language agnostic meaning whether they're images, graphics, or other visual representations, something that removes the necessity of having to read, right? Textually read language would be really helpful. All of these are pro tips. They are not mandates. You do your best. But I will tell an anecdote here. I went into a library that had told me, oh my God, their local population had shifted, the demographics. And now it was over 30% self-identified Latine folks. 30%. Many of these recent immigrants. Latine. Oh my God. And they're doing so much for this community, right? And I walk in and I look around and I see only one sign in Spanish. One. It wasn't baño, which is bathroom. It wasn't, sección de niños, like children's section. The sign in Spanish said, books en español. Now, books en español was the only Spanish sign. And I have to tell you, the only words being translated being en español doesn't seem particularly helpful. I would imagine that there are more keywords in that single phrase. So again, really think about who lives in your community and what it is that you're trying to convey. I seriously don't think that anyone who only speaks Spanish needs to read the word español. Maybe the word libro would have been sufficient. But in any event, so computadora, computador, or ordenador, which is not a word I use, but often comes up. So that's just computer. So yeah, please be very mindful about the words that you use. Google Translate AI is only going to give you some of that. This one came up a lot. This came up so much that I thought I should have 2 slides for it, and I ended up just having the one. I have to tell you that this is one that I, Christy Moran, the person giving this webinar, I did not respond to the survey. Had I responded to somebody's survey about this, I would have immediately put this down as my number 1. Please do not run to your bilingual colleagues first. It is not an emergency. The folks who work at your libraries who speak more than one language have a job. Most of the time, it is not to interpret, translate, or be the only person that speaks with the folks who speak that language. Sometimes it's a circulation clerk. Sometimes it is an instructional librarian. Sometimes it is a custodian. Sometimes it is a library manager. Sometimes it is marketing, yada, yada, yada. But what ends up happening is that oftentimes we are also your de facto, like, Spanish language Sherpa, right? And that is super awful. It is most of the time not something that we're paid for. It is something that we just are, which is bilingual. But pulling us away, and you see this come up a lot, pulling us away from the tasks that we're paid to do, that we're being expected to do, that sometimes take a lot of time, and so we're being interrupted in the middle of it. It could be more than a microaggression, okay? It could be something that very specifically affects our ability to do our job. So, is being bilingual an asset? Absolutely. In some of our library systems, are people paid a language differential? Yes. In most of our libraries, are they paid? No, right? In many cases, running to a person, pulling them away from their job can be a shock to their workday, to their work itself. It places an extra burden on those of us who are able to speak Spanish. Suddenly, it's not an asset. It becomes this burden that we bear. Moving between more than one language is very difficult. I say that I'm Spanglish as my first language. That is true. Spanish is also not my strong suit, right? So there's this added level of emotional burden that you take by switching between languages and trying to feel like you're doing your best in both. It could be very difficult. It could also mean that the person who you're trying to help feels like they're a problem, feels like they're not worthy of attention from you. It feels like I shouldn't have even said anything. And that could be very, very difficult for that person to bear, and certainly is the opposite of creating welcome. A few folks have put something in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read it because this is being captured on video or on web recording. I've also seen a line of folks waiting to be helped by bilingual staff, basically just being ignored by the non-bilingual staff. Caitlin, that is why I would have put this as my one thing I would like monolingual colleagues to know. Because on top of everything else, it's creating this like backup and service that's unnecessary, because that second part there, right? It's not an emergency. A lot of times somebody is just asking for something very basic. Where's the kids section? Can I print something out? Where are the copiers? Imagine waiting 5 minutes to get the answer to that question because only one person can answer it for you. Yes, Amy put something in the chat. So some folks work in libraries where within a job description, there is a bilingual responsibility. Every library system is different. Some have pay differentials, some don't. So yeah, that's just a part of the different HR, different staffing and job responsibility practices. I would encourage you to find what your library's policy is. And if you are a bilingual staff member who feels that they're having this extra burden placed on them, perhaps communicate that to your colleagues, because often they don't realize how difficult it is for us to switch between languages, and really like all of the baggage that comes with that. This is really important to me. I think this happens a lot, and I don't think people realize they're doing this. Please do not correlate English language fluency with anything other than English language fluency. I say this a lot. I'm Miami Cuban, right? So I was born in Miami to Cuban parents in a place where I was an ethnic and racial majority and linguistic majority. But I wasn't alone, right? Most of the people that lived around me and worked with me were folks who came either from other countries or whose families came from other countries. I had a lot of Haitian friends. So why do I mention this? I've always had a Haitian friends. My friends who were Haitian spoke minimum 3 languages. They spoke English, they spoke Haitian Creole, and they spoke French. Those are 3 languages. Some of them, many of them, because we lived in Miami, also spoke Spanish at some level. That's 4. When someone doesn't speak English, or someone doesn't speak English well, all that tells you is that they don't speak English well. It doesn't mean that they're not multilingual. It doesn't mean that they aren't fluent in multiple languages. It doesn't mean that they are not, that they don't have advanced education or expertise in something. It doesn't mean that they're dumb. It doesn't mean it. All it means, literally only means, that their English language fluency is not as strong as their fluency in another language. And I think sometimes, even if we don't intend it, we correlate English language fluency with intelligence and education, and that's unfair. And it can create a barrier to welcome, but it could also, I don't know, I feel like it's a failure of imagination. If somebody doesn't speak English, but they speak other languages, they may still be interested in a lot of really challenging, diverse programming at our libraries. They may be interested in literature and arts and history and STEM and engineering and computer sciences at levels that don't correlate directly or align directly with their English fluency. And if that's the case, then thinking beyond just somebody's English language capacity opens up all these possibilities for our library services and programming. And I hope that that makes sense, right? All we need to do when we're talking about folks that don't speak English strongly is create pathways for them to experience our libraries in ways that they can understand linguistically. That's it. So I just really want to put that out there. Sometimes folks come into our libraries and all that they can't do very well is speak English right now. And if they're coming into your libraries and they're trying to speak English, I want you to know they're English language learners. They are speaking English. These comments here kind of showcase that. These non-English speakers right now are on a linguistic journey, and we need to support them through that, wherever that they are. Another thing that comes up quite often is it is really intimidating to not speak a language that you speak, to speak a language that you don't speak well. And so creating this like extra barrier, right? We want to give people permission to speak Spanish poorly when you work at a library, sure. I also want to give permission for folks who come into libraries to not speak English well. And we do that by not judging them. English is not easy to learn. Many people are working long hours for very little pay, and sometimes it's the last thing on their minds. And that is something that we should also remember when we try to serve Latine folks, in particular recent immigrants, at our libraries. Don't use library jargon. One of our former colleagues here at the State Library used to do a whole presentation on this. But this came up. I was so surprised for for when I asked this question. Yeah, please don't ever use library jargon, but in specific, when you're trying to reach out to folks who are not originally from this country, library jargon aligns very specifically with an experience of public libraries that are very United Statesian. So what do I mean? Well, there you go. In Latin America, libraries have a role closer to academic libraries in the United States. So most of the time, when we go to the library, it's related to studying rather than to programs. The efforts should be focused to let them, meaning let the folks who are coming into your library, know what kind of services, programs, events they can find at the library in the United States, because we have a lot. That's really, really, really important. If you've heard me present, you may have heard me tell this story before. I worked more recently in Florida in a big library system, and one of my colleagues, Marva, is Jamaican. In Jamaica, spoiler, they speak English. Marva came to the US and worked in library where I was working in South Florida. And I remember having a conversation with Marva about her experience transitioning from a Jamaican library to an American library. And she's like, they were just so different. The libraries are so, so different. There are people who couldn't come into the library where she worked at, and she worked at a, quote, public library in Jamaica. So even the way that people access the building or don't have access to the building is different in different countries and different communities around the world. And if that is the case for a library where the only language people speak is English and maybe Jamaican patois, that is absolutely the case with folks who come to our country and come to our libraries from other countries where English is not the dominant language. And I hope that that makes sense. We have a very, very, very United Statesian concept of libraries in the United States. And so outreach to communities of immigrants and non-English speakers has to include an element of what is our library? What do libraries in our communities do here? Because they're not like the libraries where many folks come from, right? And so using library jargon creates a huge barrier, right? Not only do I not speak English, I don't even know what any of these words mean, because that's not a concept that we had where I come from, in any event. And something that's really important for us to remember, is that in this outreach, there's education involved, but there's also so many other hurdles that it's going to take some time. This isn't something that you're going to get people to understand or want or feel that they are privy to access in like a week. This is going to take a year. It's going to take a year and a few months. It's going to take 2 years. It's about creating and then recreating and constantly making these efforts again and again. So between library education, moving away from jargon, and kind of just opening the door to what a library is in our country, that's huge. And I think that could be very helpful in serving and creating welcome. And thank you, Jose, for mentioning the one thing that I try to tell people at the very base of all of this. The word for library in Spanish is not the word that sounds like it would be the word in Spanish. So in Spanish, a library is a biblioteca. Biblioteca is not the same thing as a librería. A librería is a bookstore. A bookstore requires you to have money, right? And there's an exchange of that. Like, I only access this place, period, because I'm going to spend money here. I can't take anything from here or it's theft, right? So there's a lot to unpack with even some of our very basic library terminology, including the word library itself. So thank you for bringing that up, Jose. That's very, very important. If for no other reason, move away from using library jargon. because the word library itself is not the same. So we have to start with a very basic education and information about what we do. And yeah, Christine writes that jargon makes libraries feel inaccessible to everyone. 100%. 100%. Say what you mean. Don't just use the big word because it's the word that we've always used. So, some ideas for creating welcome include, and are not limited to, having things that, to that last point that I mentioned, right? Having things that express to folks who are coming in the door that a library is something that wants, I don't know, is a place that wants you to be here. It's a place where you can do all of these things. It's a place where you can be whoever you are. Having signs to that effect, having flyers to that effect, even if it's just passive, can be very, very useful and meaningful to the folks who speak those languages. So as an example on this slide, and anyone is very welcome to use any of this stuff. You can download it. There are flyers. You can also ask me for the posters. Signs in Spanish that tell you what a library is. Having the exact same sign in English and then having it in Spanish conveys the equity the equity of the space for everybody who speaks these languages. I have this in one, I have the exact same thing in another. So having essential signage that is not a duplicate, right? But the same, conveying the same information in the same manner is really, really helpful. One of the things I love, I never put up a photo of this, but it's really something that I have photos of multiple. Denver Art Museum, if you were to walk in right now, walk into any of their exhibits, they have, on the wall, they have the text of the exhibits written out and all the information and titles of things. They have it in English. And then at the exact same size and the exact same font, right next to it, they have it in Spanish too. It's not giving priority to one language over the other. It's not saying that this is the main language of the exhibit. Oh, and by the way, as an afterthought, here's the translation. It's giving it the same space. It's giving it the same priority. We could do that at libraries too. Do we have to? I don't know, but you might want to. Something that, the Smithsonian's do this too. It's another library, and other museums. I've seen some libraries do it, but every time I see it, oh my God, I take photos of it. I save it on my phone. It doesn't matter where I am. So the first thing that I put on here is something that I didn't even know you could do. My last name should carry an accent over the A. But typewriters, you couldn't just put, I don't know, I'm like super old, right? Typewriters, you couldn't just put the accent mark over the A. It was very difficult. My dad didn't know how to do it. And so when things started going from being handwritten to being typewritten, well, the accent just disappeared from my name because we didn't know how to do it typographically. And then I grew up and computers happened, and I didn't know how to make accent marks outside of using cryptic codes. And those are really complicated. The other day, literally a few months ago, a colleague says to me, well, you could just add the Spanish keyboard. And I said, what? And she said, yeah. You have a Windows, right? Machine. You could totally just add another language to your keyboard. And I said, oh, how do I do that? And it's literally the silliest, simplest thing in the world. And I said, does everybody know how to use this? And she says, of course we know how to use this, Christy. We've been using the same keyboards as the ones in your country our whole lives, right? So anyone who comes into your library from Mexico will walk into a computer and know how to change the keyboard to another language. And I have to tell you all, and I bet you some of here on, like, truly, if you knew how to do this, tell me that it isn't a thing that everyone literally knows how to do. And when I present on this, people are like, I could just change this. And I say, yes. Yes. What a better way to make someone feel welcome. You don't even have to speak Spanish. You literally just tell them, yeah, use the computer, and they'll click and switch the keyboard with just a quick toggle. And all of a sudden they'll have accents over all the letters. I don't change my last name now because I feel like an imposter. It's a long personal story, but it's really like it opens up the possibility. It tells people, we expect that you are not going to only be speaking in English at this computer. So go ahead, type in whatever language you need. And by the way, I'm using this in a Spanish context. You can change the keyboard to Cyrillic and to all the other languages, because so very many other languages have different writing, different letters, different accent marks, and we can just set up our computer with the keyboard setting on the Microsoft the Microsoft OS. My mom speaks Spanish, like that was her first language. Not obviously, but just heads up, my parents speak Spanish as a first language. But they live in the US, and my mom works for the phone company. And her English, she sounds like a TV news broadcaster. Like you don't hear the Spanish accent. And so I told her I was doing this work, making Latinos feel welcome in libraries. My mom, who lives in Miami, is like, I feel welcome everywhere I go. And she says to me, it can be really insulting if everything is in Spanish. People come into this country, they know that English is the main language. You don't really need to change anything. You don't need to make anything different. And I said, yeah. And I said to her, you know, when you go to the library, you see the jigsaw puzzles? And she says, yes. So my mom loves the library. So do you like to see the jigsaw puzzles in the library? And my mom says, yes. And I said, okay, well, what if you go into a library and you saw dominoes on the table instead? And she pauses and she says, yeah, I get it. All I had to do was tell my mom, what if you saw dominoes on a table? And she understood what I meant about a sign or a signal of welcome. Why? Because dominoes are language agnostic. Because for us, and like I'm speaking on a very personal level here, but I feel like for very many of the different cultures and traditions within like Latinidad, many of us look at dominoes as something that are like very familiar to us. Dominoes encourage people to play together. Dominoes are community and shared experiences. This isn't just for folks who speak Spanish. This is for folks in all sorts of communities. But dominoes are absolutely language agnostic. And more importantly, dominoes and other local, colloquial, Latino, for lack of a better word, like games, convey signs of welcome. I have this too at my library means I expected you to be here. Thank you for coming. Play, sit down. We knew you were coming. You're welcome here. That's what dominoes means to me. And evidently that's what it means to my mom too. So it's just something very small, right? I say this as a Cuban person, don't just have coffee, have café. What does that mean? That means that all of us have beverages that are different and are celebrated. Why not encourage incorporating those into our already existing practices? We offer coffee all the time, right? So why can't we offer café? Or why can't we have days where we highlight the drinks and the foods from other countries? Not just from the one country, but from all countries, or from the countries of the folks that use our library come from. And if I can convey one most important thing to you is please don't do this all by yourself. I am not expecting that one person is going to want to create welcome and suddenly they're going to be like the most knowledgeable, the most in tune with all the different Latinidades out there. You have folks in your communities wherever you are that are already serving these populations. And by the way, are made up of people like me, people like all of these people. So find promotores, find immigration services, find Spanish language radio stations, and develop partnerships with them. and find ways of integrating their ideas with the services that you provide. So I'm now going to go to this part. So Christine is going to share now a word cloud. I asked you all, and I hope that you did, and it's okay if you didn't, but now you can do it, to convey some important thoughts, things that you picked up. Maybe they're a to-do list. Maybe they're a really good idea. Maybe they're a best practice you can incorporate, and to share them with us. So in a few words, put in some important ideas that you picked up from this presentation.
So there's a tiny little chat box in the actual word cloud area, just says enter words here, and I'm seeing some people are using it. I'll be able to download this word cloud at the end of the session.
Tina put something into the chat. I think it's worth mentioning. Dominoes, there's like a real satisfying sound to hearing the little tiles, the Vigitas hit the table. That's great. And also, for some of us, especially if it's in a shared space, it might be a little loud in a library. So I love your pro tip of putting cardboard on the table to muffle it. Great idea. Very, very good. You'll still hear them, so you'll still get a bit of that, but not quite so loud. Yeah, so I'm seeing a few things. Always be inviting, smile. Oh my God, if smile is the number one, it always is. Using bilingual signage.
I saw speak Spanish badly.
I love it. Well, to me, that's my whole thing, right? Like lean into, actually, you have permission to speak Spanish badly. Find partnerships. Yes, absolutely. I realize now that I didn't put this in the chat. So the sign or the flyer that I showed, the in La Biblioteca, you are more than welcome to download it. You are also more than welcome to pull any resources off of the Colorado State Library Spanish for Libraries page. I just put that link in the chat. There are language agnostic, thinking of language agnostic opportunities and signage and games and, anything that you could do to remove language as a barrier is fantastic. Anything that you can do to celebrate language diversity and the diversity of your library in providing services, I think is also great. Now we have a few minutes. Oh yeah, Amy, this is fantastic. Don't assume that Spanish speakers only want to browse the Spanish language section. Please remember, all that not speaking English well means is that someone is learning how to speak English better. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that that person is not interested in telescopes and stargazing. It doesn't mean that that person is not a doctor with tons of lived and learned experience in medical sciences, right? All it means is I'm learning Spanish. So we have a couple of minutes. Don't want to go over. If you all have any questions, if you want to talk about this further, you are more than welcome to reach out to me and ask me questions, and I'll do my best to answer. And yes, Caitlin, honestly, just smiling and learning how to say hi in another language can be so powerful and can create welcome at the gate. Because once you get somebody at the gate, the next thing is gonna, I don't know, you can keep them there. I don't know if that makes sense. But the minute that you don't smile, the minute that you don't make somebody feel welcome at the gate, they won't come back and they won't stay. That's really it. And it's really hard to undo the damage of that. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this was helpful. And I hope that any of you who are on here who need any resources, you can find them on that webpage. And of course, you can reach out. Christine put in the chat that if you need a certificate for today's session for attendance, go ahead and email her. She put her email in there. And there's also a survey to tell us how we did.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone.
So it is 1 o'clock right now, and I know many of you have to run off. So yes, if you need a survey, my email is in the chat, or if you need a certificate, my email is in the chat. Hopefully get them to you by tomorrow. The archive will be available on Libraries Learn. I just posted that in chat as well. And so with that, I really want to thank Christy for sharing these great ideas and for all of the great conversation that we had in chat as well. So once again, the resources will be posted on Libraries Learn, hopefully by tomorrow. And you can email me directly if you need a certificate, and we would love your feedback on today's session. I am going to wish everybody a really great afternoon.